Hello, TC, and welcome to a voyage through embedded analytics. I hope that trailer got you excited about the learning journey you're about to embark on. My name is Christophe Ortega, and I'm a product consultant here at Tableau. You might have heard my French accent, but I'm actually based in Australia, where I'm the embedded analytic expert in our Sydney office. Along with me today, we've got our superstar, Madhav Kannan, who is joining us directly from Singapore, where he's also an embedded analytic expert for the whole APAC region. So in addition of being a big fan of Game of Thrones, like you might have guessed from our trailer, our role here at Tableau is to ensure that our customers are making the best use of our product by helping them build some proof of concept, delivering some training, or answer any technical related questions. These are some of the related sessions that you may have attended to this morning or yesterday. If you didn't, that's fine. You still can watch all of the recording afterwards or download any related material. If you did, this session will be a breakdown of some of the concepts that you may have go through. So this session is part of the developer track and designed for intermediate to more advanced Tableau users. So should you have come to this Tableau conference thinking, well, Tableau is a great way to build some visualization and pretty cool dashboard, which it certainly is, I think you leave this conference with a vision of Tableau as a platform for enterprise analytics. And the piece of the puzzle that we'll focus on today is embedding. Embedding is often seen as a complex process and very technical. So in this session, we'll try and break that myth by dividing onto the different components that you need to embed. So first, we'll start with a small embedded portal demo and what it could look like for you. We'll then move on to the JavaScript island and see how you can embed and customize your different dashboards. We'll then navigate beyond the wall and explore some of the existing authentication method for seamless login. We'll then march onto the REST API kingdom and see how we can scale this solution from 10 users to 100 or thousands of them. It will then be time to wrap it up. A journey should take about 45 minutes. If we have some time, we'll do some Q&A session at the end. If not, don't worry, we'll hold the door and make sure to stay back to answer any remaining questions. So by the end of this journey, you will learn how you can embed Tableau into your custom web portal, identify the different technologies that Tableau provides to support embedding, and understand how these technologies combine to provide a solution. In the meantime, winter isn't going anywhere, so sit back in your thrones, we're about to depart. So here we go. But what is embedded analytics? Well, it is defined as data and analytics that is integrated within your web portal or web application. So really, the idea here is to provide Tableau to your end user wherever they are, whether it is on a web page, on another application or service, or let's say a mobile app. So it provides your customers and partners with a powerful self-service analytics solution that is easy to integrate, customize, and deploy. So now that we know what it is, why should you do it? Well, first of all, it adds value for your customers. Like I mentioned, your end user gets self-service analytics, meaning they can have quick and easy access to the data. Not only access the data, but also interact with it so that they can answer their own question and derive some actionable insights. Another benefit is that the content they're consuming becomes rich when enhanced with analytics. So these are some of the benefit for your end users. But what does that mean for your business? Well, if delivered as a service, it's a great way to monetize your data and to generate new revenue streams. That increased engagement makes it stickier and keeps your end user more engaged, and thus, you understand them better. You're also optimizing your product, which creates a more memorable experience and makes it stand out from the crowd. So I'll now pass it on to Madhav to walk us through what an embedded portal could look like.
Thanks, Chris. So I hope the video got you guys excited. If not, Chris mentioning why we should do embedded analytics, at least hopefully that got you excited. But now we're going to go into a bit of a demo for you guys to see hands-on what an embedded portal looks like. So let's set sail. All right. So for the next few minutes, I don't want you to think about Tableau Server or Tableau Online, but I just want you to think about being an end user on this financial portal, right? So as an end user, what are you likely to do? You're likely to come onto this web page and perhaps click on Login. So I come over here. I've been asked for my password and my username, so I'm just going to enter that over very quickly and sign in. And when I sign in, I'm greeted by a few different dashboards that look like Tableau dashboards, but I don't know that yet, that I could potentially access, right? So it looks similar, but then I'm just going to go ahead and click on one of these. These are those awkward moments when you're hoping that everything is going OK. And it is, but it's just slow, so bear with me. But here we are, right? So we have a portal experience over here. We have a dashboard that, well, it is a Tableau dashboard, no surprise there. But it's very integrated into the web page itself. So if you take a look at this, it looks like individual portions. It's highly interactive. I could go ahead and select a particular sheet if I wanted to, or select a filter as well if I wanted to do that, reset everything that I've made changes to, and if I wanted to export, I could do that, and so on. So all the typical Tableau functionality that I might be used to as an end user on server or on online is available to me, which is good. And if you noticed, I only signed into the portal. I never actually signed into the Tableau server or Tableau online to look at this dashboard. So there's a lot that's actually going on behind the scenes, and that's what we're going to be covering today. So I'm just going to switch over. Here we go. So there are a few different concepts that we're going to be covering, as Chris mentioned, and let's start by going over to the JavaScript island as the first step. So the JavaScript island basically allows us to learn more about the JavaScript API. And what exactly is the JavaScript API? So the JavaScript API allows you to take a dashboard that's on Tableau Server or Tableau Online and bring it into your own custom web page, right? So you can have anything you want around it, your own bells and whistles, that's absolutely fine. But what it gives you is the dashboard itself. So in scenarios where you're actually looking to embed, this is the most significant concept that we're going to be covering first. So while if you wanted to do this in terms of actually executing the code, this is a sample of what that might look like. I know that this looks a bit scary. There's a lot of code on screen. So we're going to go through this step by step. So the first thing that we want to do, if we wanted to embed a Tableau dashboard, taking it from server or online onto a web page, is, well, you define a container. So imagine you have a completely blank web page, and you want to put Tableau in a specific area. We define a container for it so that we can say, well, I know I can predict where exactly the Tableau dashboard is going to show up. In this case, we've defined a container and given it an ID called visContainer. We then call the JavaScript API, which actually allows us to embed and then perform a lot more functionality that we'll be covering a bit later today. So that can be done either by calling the JS file that's on Tableau Public or on Tableau Online or on your own installed Tableau Server as well. It's actually installed when you set up Tableau Server on your own as well. And then finally, once we've got the JavaScript file, we can initialize the visualization and specify some options. So in this, there's a lot that's going on. So I'm just going to break it down step by step. Now, do you remember that we actually defined a container about maybe a minute ago? So we're going to use that container to put the Tableau dashboard inside it. And for that, once we have the container, we need to tell Tableau, well, which dashboard do you really want to embed? So you see that there is a URL there which we need to provide. Now, the URL comes from Tableau Server and follows a very, very specific syntax or format. So it is always going to be following this one, so just pay attention over here. So it's always the server name, followed by a keyword /t, which refers to a particular site that you want to embed your dashboard from, followed by the actual site name, followed by another keyword called /views, and then finally ending with the name of the dashboard, the name of the workbook, and the name of the dashboard. So this is a syntax that's followed, and we're going to be using this syntax when we do a demo of our own as well. You can also see that we have a few different options that have been specified. So we can either hide tabs or toolbars, or if the first time that a dashboard loads, we can print a message or something like that, and we're going to take a look at what that looks like. Now, we've defined our container. We know our URL, or the dashboard that we want to embed, and we have our options already. So what do we do next? And that's the final line, which is actually letting us embed and creating a viz object that you see where it says var viz. And that viz object really allows us to do a lot more, but that we'll cover in a few moments. So we've gone through a fair amount of text on this slide. Let's actually see what it looks like in a demo. Once again, I'm back here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my local Tableau server. I'm on site called TC19, and I have a dashboard with a workbook called Superstore to embed, and I'm going to open that up. Now, personally, I'm a big fan of dark mode. So when I actually want a dashboard, I sort of usually go for the dark background. And yet again, my computer has to be slow today, of all days. But this is the kind of background that I like to use, right? Anyone who likes this kind of dark background? Yes, OK, good. I'm glad I'm not alone, so thank you for that. So if I wanted to take this and bring it onto my own web page, how could I do that? So do you remember that code that we were showing on the screen? Well, I have that typed out over here. Let me just make it a bit bigger in case you can't see it, but I think it's OK. And I've just taken that code, or a small variation of it, and brought it over onto my text editor. Now, you can see that it's got the same elements. So it's got that container that's been defined. It's got the options over here. And it's got the URL, which is, of course, a generic URL, which will not work. So I'm going to delete this, come back to my Tableau server, click on Share. And this is very important. This is where you get the URL from, and copy this link. Now, once I've done this, I can come back over here and paste it. Now, you see that we get a lot of extra parameters from Tableau, which are useful, but we don't need to worry about those now. Now, if you remember the structure of the URL, we're going to go through that here. So we have the server name, which I've named my own, followed by the keyword /t. If you remember, we were on the site TC19, which is why that's added over here, followed by another keyword. And then the workbook name is Superstore to embed. And finally, the dashboard name is Overview. So I'm just going to save this now, come back onto my screen, and go ahead and embed this. Hopefully, it loads faster now. And there we go. Right? So one thing that I didn't bring to your attention in the options was that I actually wanted to have an alert such that every time the dashboard loads for the first time, it gives me an alert. Now, this is something that you could use to either add event listeners or to do some kind of custom action, and it's a very, very useful functionality in Tableau. Here, of course, I'm just displaying an alert, which you see when the dashboard loads, it says we're at TC. Now, this dashboard is great, right? I've been able to white label it quite a bit, but do you guys feel like something is sticking out of this dashboard that doesn't make it seem that nice? There is a gray bar at the bottom that, personally, I just really dislike, and I would like to get rid of it. So let me go ahead and do that. And this is where the options start becoming even more useful. So you see I have the options to hide tabs or hide a toolbar, and I'm going to just set this to true. Now, if I come back, I have the same dashboard, but I don't have a toolbar, right? Completely white labeled and a dark background that I have for me. So this is great, but I sort of lost a bit of functionality when I got rid of the toolbar. I mean, I had the export to PDF option, I had the ability to reset the view and go back to normal, and a lot of other functionalities as well. So I can't really provide this without giving my end user some of that functionality because, well, they will need that. So that's where we go into a bit more advanced application of the JavaScript API and the Viz object that we created. So let me switch back. Perfect. So the JavaScript API allows you to do a lot more than just embed. It actually allows HTML elements that are on your portal, and by HTML elements, I mean drop-downs or buttons or event listeners to actually interact with and modify the Tableau visualization. So we're just going to see a couple of examples of what that looks like today, but there are a lot more. So again, instead of looking at it in this view, because it gets a bit, while some people are taking photos, I'll just stay on the slide. Well, I was a big fan of breaking it down, but I guess people prefer it like this, so please go ahead. All right. OK, we have one person who just decided to take a photo, so go ahead. Yeah. Don't worry, you can always see it later. So I'm going to break this down now. I'm sorry, guys. Clearly, you were not a fan of that. But once again, we're going to define the HTML elements here. And in this case, we're defining a drop-down, and we're defining a button. Now, the purpose of the drop-down is very simply to allow me to filter so that I can use either a combo box or something similar to that and have that outside of Tableau, but interacting with the dashboard. Now, why would I do that? It's usually to have my own customizable filter, because in certain cases, you want the filter box to look in a very specific way, and Tableau may not allow that. And this is something that allows you to achieve the same. We also have a button, and that's just exporting to PDF in this case. But of course, there's a lot more that you can do. All those toolbar functionalities that you've seen on Tableau Server or Tableau Online, it allows you to replicate those as well. Now, if you take a look at the HTML of the dropdown, it actually has a function called change filter, right? It's, so when it says on change, call a function called change filter. But currently, that doesn't do anything yet. So we need to define the JavaScript for it. The same thing for the button, on click, export to PDF, but no one really knows what that function is yet. So let's go ahead and actually define functionality. Now, I've been stressing on the Viz object a lot, which actually allows us to control the Tableau dashboard. And that's exactly what we're going to be using here. So the second one is actually easier, so I'll start with that. For exporting to PDF, you can just write a function that says, well, viz.showExportPDF dialog, and it shows you the usual Tableau PDF dialog. For the filter functionality, for example, that's at a sheet level. So when you load a viz, that's usually at a dashboard level, potentially. It could also be a sheet, but usually it's at a dashboard level. So not only am I getting the viz itself, I'm actually going down to a specific sheet that I'm looking to filter. So you see that I'm actually specifying the sheet name. And then I can always go ahead and either apply a filter value or clear it out entirely as well. So this is a bit heavy on the JavaScript, but this is just to give you an idea of what's going on. We have all these samples available on our website as well, which you can always take a look at. So I'm just going to be going over these two examples. And we've covered these different portions. But there's a lot more that the JavaScript API can also allow you to do that we're not covering today. So whether that's allowing you to add an event listener, which I've been mentioning, or whether it is to get the underlying or the summary data, or this one crops up quite often, whether it's to resize a visualization if you change the dimensions of your browser, All of these are functionalities that the JavaScript API allows, and we have a fair few samples for each of these. But first, let's go into a demo of how the filtering and the export to PDF buttons work. All right, so I'm back here. I'm back to my situation where I haven't really provided anyone any extra functionality. I've just embedded the visualization. So I come back over here, and I have another script, and you can take a look at this, right? So I've defined a filter for regions. So if you remember in the dashboard, why don't I switch back? I had this region filter over here, but I actually want to take this out of the dashboard and bring it into my code itself or into my HTML. So I've defined a region button or a region dropdown for that, and I have the ability to filter on a specific sheet, and then I'm either clearing it or I'm applying the specific region value that I want to use as a filter. For the export to PDF piece, you can see that I'm just calling the viz object that I've defined outside now to show the export PDF dialog. So if I come back over here and load this instead, so you see now I have those two buttons at the bottom, which are in the kind of color scheme that I quite enjoy. It's the same black and white that I've been using throughout. And I also have the viz just like I've had it before. So if I wanted to export this to PDF, I can just go ahead, click on this, and it loads the exact same export to PDF dialog. And there was just one line of code. It was just that viz.show export PDF dialog. That's all it needed for me to be able to achieve this. For the filtering piece as well, if I just go over here, you see I have a few different options. Now, these options are those that I've hard-coded, so that's something to keep in mind. And if I click on West, for example, you see that the viz automatically adjusts to West. I've kept this button on, even though, of course, it's not needed anymore, just to show you that it changes as well. So that's something that you can always look at. And if I say East instead, it shifts to East. So it's a very interactive filter, just like how you would have in Tableau. But it's, of course, in a very different layout or UI. And that's something that usually comes in fairly common as a request for those who are looking to embed. So this is great. I've been able to white label it. We've completely conquered, I would hope so, the JavaScript API piece. But what about this experience? How does it look for another user? Because I'm already logged into my Tableau server because we were actually looking at it over here, right? So how does it look like for another user? So I'm going to open an incognito window and try to press enter. And when I do that, I get this dialog. Now, this is not an error. This is actually intended behavior. But this is purely because I haven't yet logged into Tableau on this incognito window. And in the previous example, I had logged in purely because I was already on the server. And in the demo example before that, there was actually something happening under the hood that we didn't really talk about then, which Christoph is going to cover now.
Thanks, Madhav. So we've reached an important milestone in our journey as we face the authentication wall. So as your end user logs in onto your portal, they shouldn't have to reset or add another set of credentials to run the Tableau visualization. So we need to find a way to get beyond the wall. So single sign-on is what will help us achieve that seamless experience. So single sign-on allows a user to access multiple applications with only one set of login credentials. So these are some of the single sign-on authentication methods that Tableau Server allows for. In this session, we'll focus on the top two first. So trusted authentication, or trusted ticket, is a method that allows a user to log in seamlessly onto Tableau through a token-based mechanism. So how does it work exactly? Well, you need three entities. First, your web portal, trusted web host, and Tableau Server. As your end user logs in onto your web portal, it then sends a ticket request. And that request gets sent to the trusted web host, but then pass it onto Tableau Server. If the request comes from a trusted web host and the user exists on Tableau Server, Tableau Server then provides a ticket, and that ticket is returned back to our web portal. So now we have our ticket, and we can include it inside the URL, and the URL gets passed back to the Tableau Server. At this stage, we are not prompted with any logging window anymore, because we've included the ticket within the URL, And Tableau Server is able to redeem that ticket and render the visualization for that specific users. So hopefully that gives you a good overview understanding of that method, but let's drill down onto the different steps involved. So first, you'll need to add a trusted IP address to your Tableau server. And you can do that through the TSM web user interface or the TSM command line. If you're using a Tableau server version prior 2018.1, you still can use tab admin command line, but we'll still encourage you to upgrade. So now we've trusted our IP address. So what does a ticket request look like? Well, something very similar to this. It's a post request followed by your server domain's name, followed by the keyword trusted, and 2 different parameters. So the first one is for username, where the username value must be for a licensed Tableau Server user. And the other one is, well, to specify the site that you're planning on targeting. If you don't specify that parameter, you'll be prompted to the default site on your Tableau Server. So that's fine. So we get the ticket here. So now we need to include it within the URL. And the URL would be something very similar to what Madhav walked us through earlier. So the domain name, we'll just need to add the keyword trusted as well as the ticket value. And then the site, workbook, and the view that we're trying to render. So let's now switch onto a demo and see it in action. So first of all, I wanted to show you the TSM web user interface where you can add that trusted IP address. So this is TSM. You'll see at the top, there's 3 different tabs. So if you go to the configuration tab, under user identity and access, you'll see different authentication method. If you click on trusted authentication, this is where you can add your different IP address. So in this demo, we've added localhost and then saving pending changes. So I'll now jump into Postman, which is a request generating tool. And that will help us simulate what a ticket request actually look like. It's a bit small, I'll just zoom in. So like I mentioned, the structure would be, it's a post request followed by my domain or the IP address that I just trusted on Tableau Server, followed by trusted, the keyword, my parameter, so who is trying to access that visualization, as well as the site that I'm planning to render. And you'll see that in here, I have all of the value to actually log in onto my Tableau server. So I'm going to go ahead and send that request to Tableau Server. So Tableau Server now returns a very unique string of value, and this is my ticket. So the only reason why Tableau provided me with that ticket, remember, is because first I trusted my IP address, and my user, in this case Madhav, is a licensed Tableau user on Tableau Server. So if I now that we have our ticket, I can copy that ticket and paste it inside our HTML code. So again, the keyword trusted followed by the ticket dash. So that's all I need to do. So I'll save that and reopen the incognito window that Madhav had previously. And let's see what happens. So you'll see that at this stage, I'm not prompted with any login window anymore because I've included the ticket within the URL. Another thing here is it's specific for each user, as I mentioned. So in this case, Madhav would be the CEO of the company and should have access to the full data, so he can see the full US. Tableau Server also mentioned his name here, noticing that he's the one logging in. So what happens if my user isn't licensed on Tableau Server? So let's try and make another request on Postman with a user that doesn't exist. So I'll just randomize this one, send that request. The ticket value that is now rendered is a value of -1. And that just means that that user won't be able to render the visualization on your web portal. I also mentioned that it's specific for each user. So what happens now if I change the value and I'm going to try and log in onto Tableau. So I'm just going to change that value here. And resend that ticket. Again, that ticket value would be different for me than it was for Madhav. So again, I can copy that ticket, switch back here, and just replace my ticket value here. Again, I'll save it and reopen the window. In this case, I'm a regional manager, so I shouldn't have access to all of the data. So if I sign in, you'll see that now I only see my territory, so only the data that I should have access to. And Tableau Server knows who's logging in. So we successfully managed to go beyond the wall. But I've mentioned there's different authentication methods. And Madhav will walk us through an alternative.
All right. So let's now walk over and talk about SAML. No one usually says that. If they say that at a party, this is the most boring party ever. Just keep that in mind. Yeah. So SAML enables SSO by using a third-party identity provider. And essentially, it authenticates you on the basis of assertions. Now, I'm not sure whether this is a very easy concept to understand. So let's actually break it down with an architecture diagram once more. So once again, similar to what you saw in trusted tickets or trusted authentication, we have 3 players in this. You have a web portal, you have Tableau Server or Tableau Online, and you have a third-party identity provider. Now, this is already configured with Tableau Server or Tableau Online so that when you actually make a request to Tableau Server or Tableau Online, I'm just going to start saying server now, but you can assume that it's online as well, it actually redirects you to the identity provider. Now, typical identity providers include, say, OneLogin or Okta or Ping and so on. You might be using one of them already. And essentially, what you're doing is you're authenticating yourself with the identity provider first. So if you are then authenticated, what the identity provider does is it sends back a token to Tableau Server saying, hey, we have a user whose name is Madhav. He has a specific email address. He's logged in successfully into the identity provider. But does he exist on Tableau Server as well? So that's where there's a match that's being made because Tableau Server looks for the user, checks if those same details are in place, and if so, it gives me back a session token that allows me to view all my dashboards. So this is a process that looks fairly similar to trusted tickets, but it does work slightly differently in terms of the underlying mechanism and how things happen. So switching over, no photos, right? OK, great. So switching over. Now, we could talk about setting up SAML on Tableau Server, but we would probably have to cancel data night out because it's going to take a while if we do that. So I'm just going to go over it at a very high level. The first thing that you would do is just to configure your identity provider. Like I said, that could be OneLogin or Okta or one of those for connecting to Tableau Server. So you let the identity provider know what the host name is and a few more details, and then you generate what is known as a metadata file. Once that metadata file has been generated, you can actually then come over to Tableau Server. If it's Tableau Server, then you would again use TSM. If it's Tableau Online, you can just do it directly on the site itself and import that file to be able to ensure that there is communication between Tableau Server and the identity provider. Finally, and this step is the most painstaking and where I've spent a lot of time troubleshooting for customers, make sure that the assertions match. Sometimes it's very likely that the identity provider is sending an email address, but your Tableau Server is expecting a username or the other way around. And yeah, it's not fun when you realize there was actually something very simple that kept you from configuring correctly. So just make sure that the assertions are correct. So once again, let's go into a demo of how this is. So we're not really going to go into a demo of how you access Tableau Server directly via SAML, but instead about what or how that embedded experience looks like. So I'm just going to come over here. Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. All right. Let me just refresh the page, make sure everything is OK. And I'm going to go ahead and log in. So once again, if you remember, I have my own custom login form, and I'm going to sign in. Now, I want you to pay attention to the bottom left, because there are a lot of redirects that are taking place. The typical redirect flow is that the web portal will go and hit the identity provider hits Tableau, and then make sure that you are authenticated. Now, if you're really quick, you can see this on the bottom left, so just keep an eye out as well. When you sign in, it says waiting for localhost, and then it goes to one login, and then online.tableau.com. I'm using Tableau Online for this example just so that we can slow it down a bit and show you that example. And that's how quickly things happen. But it's a very, very seamless experience at the end of the day for the end user. So whether it's trusted tickets or whether it's SAML, the kind of end user experience that the user gets is that it's a completely white label solution and a very seamless authentication process for them as well. Now, this was SAML, and this sort of brings us to the end of our authentication piece. But what happened over here? There we go. Oh, sorry about that. All right. Now, this brings us to the end of the authentication piece. And so far, we've been talking about logging in or perhaps using the JavaScript API for one user or two users or maybe a handful, right? But what about if we really want to scale this out to 100 or 10,000 and so on? How can we actually do that using Tableau? So that's where we have Christoph once again, who's going to be talking about the REST API.
Thanks, Nadav. So we've come quite far in our journey already. So as we have expanded our borders and discovered new territories, scalability becomes more and more important. And that's why we'll march onto the REST API kingdom to see how this can help automate a lot of these admin tasks on Tableau Server. So the REST API allows you to manage and change Tableau Server resource at scale programmatically via any languages that support HTTP requests. So if you're still wondering how the REST API can help you, well, let me tell you a quick story. So let's meet Geek and Non-Geek. They are twin brothers. I know, their parents didn't get very creative with their names. Anyhow, they've been given a challenge, the first one to add 1,000 users on their Tableau server and set up the permission. So on the x-axis, you'll see the number of users they've added, and on the y-axis, the time they spend adding these users. So let's get started. They both go ahead and start adding these users, at first, manually. After 100 of users added on the platform, it's still a tie. I know, the suspense is unbearable. Anyhow, like at this point though, Geeks gets annoyed at these repetitive tasks and decides to take the time to write a script using the REST API functionality to automate the process. In the meantime, his brother is making fun of his complicated method, and after a while decides to take a break and watch an episode of The Bachelor. Once he's done, Geek can just run his script and add the remaining user, and therefore wins the challenge. So lesson learned. Well, first, you shouldn't watch The Bachelor. But most importantly, the REST API will help you scale and automate a lot of these manual tasks. So let's drill down now a little bit about the structure of the API. So first, you'll see that you start with the HTTP verb. That will just indicate the type of action that you want to perform. So if you start with get, this is to retrieve information from Tableau Server. Post, to publish new content. Put would update existing content. And delete will be removing different data source or dashboard that you have on your Tableau Server. After that, you'll have, again, your domain's name and the URI, which stands for Uniform Resource Identifier. And again, it's to specify the type of resource you want to work with, which dashboard, which view, which sheets exactly, or which data source. Right? So if we take an example, and I'm a manager, I want to retrieve some information, let's say about the number, all of the different workbooks that I've got into one particular site. Well, the request would look something similar to this, where first I'll start with get, because I'm trying to retrieve information, followed by my domain name, followed by the API version, the site, project, and the specific workbook that I'm planning on retrieving information from. So again, let's try and jump into a demo to see what it looks like. All right, so first of all, I'll just show you in here, we've got our TC19 site, and within that site, we've got different projects. So the default project in here, I'm just gonna go ahead. Within that project, we have 2 different workbooks. And in one of my Superstore workbook, I've got about 8 different views, right? So I'm gonna use Postman now to retrieve these information from my site. So the first step would be first to log in onto my Tableau server. So again, just my user, my IP address here, and followed by the keyword sign in. In the body, that's where I will add my credential in here. So I'm just gonna send that particular request. And Tableau server comes back with me with the site ID that I've just signed in, my user ID for that particular session, as well as a credential token. So in this case, I'll copy that token and paste it inside the settings of Postman. So the reason I'm doing that is this will be served as a session token for the rest so that I don't have to copy and paste it every time for each new request. So I'll just update it now. All right, so let's get back to our example about I'm trying to retrieve different workbooks from a particular project. So again, the request would be get, because I'm retrieving information, my domain's name, the API version, the site, where the site ID, again, I've done like a parameter to automate and make it easier for this demo, followed by the keyword workbooks. So if I send this particular request, again, Tableau server comes back with me with all of the different workbooks. So if you remember, I had 2 different workbooks on my Tableau server in that specific site. Well, these are my workbooks with the project ID, the owner, and things like that. So let's say that I want to drill down further, and I want to retrieve all the different views within one of these 2 workbooks. Well, again, I'm going to copy this particular ID, which is the workbook ID, followed by the views keyword, because I'm trying to drill down one step further. And if I send that request now, Tableau server comes back with all of the different views within that workbooks. So all of the requests would be pretty much all the same. You just have to change the verb and just specify where you're targeting. So this is for retrieving information. But Geek and non-Geek had to add users. So how did they do that? Well, in this case, we have the post request, because we're trying to add different resources on our Tableau server. So again, very similar, IP address, IP, the site ID, which is a parameter in this case, followed by the username keyword. In this case, in the body of my request, I've also added what is the name that I want to add on my Tableau server, as well as its site role. So again, I'm sending this request. And Tableau server now confirms that this user has been added and provide him with a user ID and his name as well. So again, this might look still like we're doing things manually, but remember, every REST API functionality can be automated programmatically via any languages that support HTTP. And that's what will help you scale and automate all of these admin tasks. So I'll pass it back now onto Madhav to close the loop onto our learning journey.
Thanks, Chris. So let's start talking about how this all comes together, right? So as Chris mentioned, this looks like it's very manual, and we've manually generated trusted tickets, we've manually added users or queried the workbooks, etc. But there is a way for all of this to come together, assuming that you're looking to build a full-fledged application. And that's what we're going to do now in terms of revisiting actually what we covered right at the beginning. If you remember the embedded portal, we're actually going to go back now and see how all the different concepts we've learned today combine to actually give you that experience. So once again, switching over. So I come back to my very first tab. I'm going to sign out so that I can sign back in. Now, the first thing you notice here are all these individual thumbnails, right? So how did that happen? So this is actually the REST API. So the REST API, once I sign in, the REST API actually queries the different workbooks that are applicable for me as a user, and then pulls them out. And then I can also get, very simply like Chris did, the different dashboards within these workbooks. And then the final level, which we didn't go into today, is actually being able to pull out the thumbnails of the different dashboards. And then you can actually display that over here and hyperlink it so that you can point to the correct URL structure for the dashboard that you're eventually going to load. So this is entirely done by the REST API for any user who signs in into your web portal. So this is the first step. Once again, now I'm going to go ahead and click over here. And if you remember from the previous experience, we were signed in seamlessly. You may now realize that that's either trusted tickets or SAML. In this case, it's trusted tickets. If I were to actually go into the code, you would probably see a ticket that's been auto-generated, because this request happens on the fly when we're logging in, so that it's kept as dynamic as possible. You can also, of course, see that from the JavaScript API perspective, everything here is meant to match the background so that it looks like a seamless experience. I have hidden the toolbar. We do have these individual buttons as well that work very similarly to what we've gone through. In fact, export PDF is exactly the same. You could also have export data, and if you wanted to, you could also actually have your custom web edit window. So I'll just give you an example of that as well. So this is actually web edit, very much within your own portal itself. So if someone were to actually go ahead and start to edit, they could just open up a new sheet if you do give them access and take that forward as well. Let me come back to the original, and there we go. So this is how we've actually used each of the different concepts that we've spoken about today and combined it all together to actually give you an experience of what an end user portal would look like. So switching back. All right. So that actually brings us to the end of the journey. But we do have a bit of time for some questions. And we hope that if any of you do have questions, we have Chris, who's actually got a mic as well. So we have about maybe 3 or 4 minutes. So happy to take any questions that you might have. If not, you can also ask us later. Is it a shy audience today? Yeah. OK, we have a couple of questions. Chris, one behind you as well on the other side.
Just thinking about the parameters that you can pass in to Tableau, how can we secure those and make sure that end users cannot do some type of man-in-the-middle attack?
Yep. You want to take that? Should I take it? OK, sure. So it is possible to pass parameters securely. So there are a couple of things here. One is about whether you actually have usernames. So if you were looking to pass in usernames, ideally you don't want to do that directly. You want to do that as a row-level security component, which is actually happening under the hood. If you remember how someone accessed the central area versus someone accessed just the west region and so on. Another one is actually to use something like a decoding key. So some kind of encryption key where you actually pass a value, and then you're using a parameter in your Tableau dashboard to unhash it, essentially. So that's a concept that's also been gaining popularity. But in certain cases, we do have it open as HTML. So if this is something which you know can be tweaked and hence used to see for other users, I would recommend using one of those two techniques. Yeah. So sorry, I do notice that a few people are leaving. So maybe I'll just finish off on the slides, and then we take the questions after. Sure. So we did want to sign off with a few resources. So if there's any slide you should take a photo of, I hope it's this one. Because yeah, these are good resources that we have, this covers the 3 different concepts that we have today. And the last resource, the embedding playbook, that actually also works quite well to sort of wrap it all up together. So it gives you an idea of how the flow works in terms of how you can proceed by first embedding and then bringing in single sign-on and then REST API, similar to what we did today. All done? OK. You have a couple. Yeah, just give me a minute. I'll just finish off first. All right. So finally, this is part of the Tableau Developer Program.
Wait. We have a...
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
and here are some Tableau Developer resources as well. And I'll just leave it on this slide so that I could request for you guys to fill in the feedback. Ideally, if you can do it, just take out your phone and just help us with the survey so that we're able to just improve on our presentation and come up with better content for next year. So I'll leave it on this slide, and I think we can take some questions now. Yeah.
What would be your recommendation for leveraging subscriptions? Is that something you'd have to completely build custom, or is there JavaScript API or something pre-built to support that feature?
So that's a good question. So there are parts of Tableau that are part of the VizQL, and there are parts that are parts of the Viz portal. I know it's getting a bit technical, but yeah, so certain things such as comments and subscriptions are part of the Viz portal, which means that if you want to actually have these as part of the experience that you're going to provide, you will have to do it in a custom manner, but you use the REST API for that. So in fact, if anyone's free, we have an embedded analytics booth or a cabana that's right near the data pool. So we actually have a custom subscription utility as well. So it is a custom UI, but the minute you press submit or enter, it generates a REST API call that will then put that on a schedule, and which based on the kind of frequency that you've mentioned. Something similar for comments as well. Chris, we also have a question over on that side, by the way. Yeah, later on.
Two quick questions. One, in another session, someone talked about webhooks, and in what version is that available? And is that also, I guess, available for embedded views to use webhooks? And my second question is, could you go back one slide, 1 second?
Go back one slide?
Yeah,
oh,
thanks.
You want to take? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I like your second question. It's not something that needs an answer from my side, so that's good. With regard to webhooks, so webhooks is coming out, or has now come out as of last week in 2019.4, but it is V1, so there are a few webhooks available, and webhooks essentially help you to understand or act as event triggers based on when someone's published a workbook, or when someone has maybe modified the owner of a workbook and so on. We have about 7 or 8 webhooks as part of V1, and that's something that definitely will be expanded going into the future. Yes, webhooks can very much be used with Tableau Embedded as well. There's no restriction, because if you notice, everything that's being powered at the back is actually just a regular Tableau server. We're just extending that capability by taking it away from that kind of UI and giving it in the hands of a customized UI that you can give to your end users. But it is a Tableau server at the back. So especially in a scenario where you're exposing web edit based on the demo that I had just shown, it would be actually a good idea to have that kind of trigger set up if you know people are going to be creating workbooks on the fly, so that, yeah, you're just aware of what's going on as compared to being more reactive. So it helps you to be a bit more proactive about things.
Can you use the REST API to publish the dashboard? So if you want to give somebody a self-analytic platform, but via your own portal, so does the API supports publishing of the dashboards?
Yes, it does. So we actually have a fairly common use case where, assuming it's a customer-facing deployment, you have, say, 10, 20 customers, each of them on an individual site. You want to give a consistent experience to them. So it's the same looking dashboard, so same kind of template, but essentially it's different data, right? So that it's customer specific. In that scenario, the REST API is very handy because it allows you to do a mass publish of the workbooks after modifying that workbook. So REST API definitely supports that.
We have one more.
Chris is getting his workout today.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So I have two questions. Does Tableau also supports the LDAP authentication?
Okay. Yes, it does.
It does?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the example where we have geek and non-geek, right? Like adding users to the Tableau server and all. So how are we maintaining users and how are we adding that programmatically?
Okay, that's a good question. So usually, if you were to use LDAP or AD, you wouldn't be adding users to the REST API. The subtext of that was that this is a local authentication configured server. So that's why you're allowed to manually add users. If you're configured to AD or LDAP, you're likely to be doing a sync. So then you would be adding them to a specific group on your LDAP or AD instead, as compared to using the REST API to add the users. That's a much more preferred way if you're already configured onto that.
So in this case, we don't have LDAP, right? So how are where are we having those list of 1,000 users?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Like in this case, whatever the example we
Yep.
have seen, we don't have LDAP.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So in this case, where are we storing those usernames? Like we want to create those accounts, right?
Okay. Yeah. So that's usually in a user table in a database. That's where you would be retrieving those users and then adding it onto Tableau Server. In certain other cases, you also have a scenario where someone is just coming onto the platform and creating themselves as a user right on the spot. So that's, again, something that the REST API is very useful for, because it just triggers that workflow to add the user onto Tableau Server as well, so that they're fairly seamlessly able to access a dashboard as soon as it's created. But to answer your question, it's usually in a database table with a hashed password. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough and well documented, so thank you. The first thing I wanted to say was a comment for the new people in the room, how important that T is in the URL. It's very easy to go copy the URL from the browser and it becomes a £sign.
That's right.
And it doesn't work. So make sure you replace that £sign with a T. And then second, I wanted to ask you a question about the version of your JavaScript API. I think it's compatible with different versions of Tableau Server, if I'm not mistaken, and just wanted to ask you what you thought.
So the version that I'm using is 2.3, I think. That's actually something that I don't pay attention to much. The reason why, let me shift this over. So I'm using Tableau 2.min.js, but if you actually take a look at this file online, or if you just download it, it actually redirects you to 2.3.js. So that's why we're using that. That being said, we do have some improvements to the JavaScript API in the works. So that would be our big update going forward. But yeah, there's no clarity on when exactly that would come in. But this redirects to 2.3.js currently, if I'm not mistaken.
All right, I think we'll get kicked out of the room soon.
Yeah.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And again, if you can